Welcome back, players. I'm Jack with 36 Cancel, and this is Coco the Weiss Cat, and it's time once again for the blind to lead the blind in my series about how to get better in Weiss Schwarz. Now, the topic of this video stems from something that makes Weiss Schwarz a bit different than other card games. So in most games, when you take your turn, you'll do a few actions, play a few cards, and overall have an average of maybe 3 to 6 actual plays per turn. Now, of course, this varies wildly from game to game and even from deck to deck. And of course, there are plenty of decks in any TCG that are designed to dirtle around on their turn for 30 minutes until they win, but that's not really the norm. However, in Weiss Schwarz, when the game gets going and you take your turn, there's a lot going on. You're drawing several cards, perhaps utilizing several abilities, putting a bunch of cards from your deck into your waiting room, searching your deck and waiting room multiple times, making at least 3 attacks, and not to mention utilizing climax combos, and all sorts of interactions your cards have with each other. In summary, each turn in Weiss Schwarz can be filled with choices, plays, and sacrifices to make. And bearing that in mind, the order in which you decide to do all these things matters a lot. That's why today's episode of How to Get Better at Weiss Schwarz is all about sequencing. Sequencing is a term that means doing things in an order that lets you get the most out of the things you do. Does that sound stupid? Well, while it's a bit difficult to put into words, as soon as I bring up a few examples, you'll see exactly what I mean. In fact, you're probably doing a lot of sequencing already without even thinking about it. Let me try to explain. You see, when you do just about anything in Weiss Schwarz, the state of the game changes. Whenever you play a card, attack with a card, or like I said, do just about anything, cards move to different zones, you have more or less stock, the number of cards in your hand changes, the state of the stage changes, and in general, cards move around inside different zones of the game. And in Weiss Schwarz, when cards move around, it impacts what other cards do or how effective abilities are. So when you sequence your plays, what you're trying to do is keep in mind how each one of your actions that move cards from your hand to the stage, from your stock to the waiting room, and so forth impacts the state of the game, and how that future state will affect plays you'll make after the one you're going to make next. Yeah, that sounds extremely complicated and dumb. So instead of trying to explain the esoteric, complex, and word salad theory behind sequencing, I'm going to use some real game examples to talk about what sequencing is and why it's important. Luckily for us, there's a card that encapsulates the idea of sequencing with its 2 different abilities, and it's Earth Mother's Disciple, Priestess. So Priestess here is a level 0 with 2 different auto abilities that happen when she's played to the stage from your hand. Because they're both triggered by the same action, you as the owner of the card choose the order in which to use them. This is generally true for any auto abilities that happen at the same time, even on different cards you control, barring fringe circumstances. So let's talk about sequencing with this card. Her first auto ability is that when she comes in, you can look at the top card of your deck and put it on the top or bottom of your deck. And her second ability is that when she comes in, you can pay 1, pitch 1, and search your deck for a character. Now players, I ask you, given that you can use these 2 abilities in any order, which one does it make sense to use first? Obviously, the answer is that if we use the top check ability first and then choose to leave the card we see on the top of our deck there, and then choose to use the searching ability, we may as well not have used the first ability at all. And of course, this is dead obvious to most people if you stop and think about it for 2 seconds, but that's why I'm using it as an example. You're choosing to use one effect before another because if you do things in that order, you end up with more value from the abilities your cards have. And that's exactly what sequencing in Weiss Schwarz looks like. Now, we're lucky that Priestess here is designed in a way that makes the benefit of sequencing obvious. What we're going to do in this video is expand on this idea and showcase a few examples of how different cards impact the game state and how other abilities and cards that you can use can capitalize on that change or become better if you choose to use them in the best order. Now, obviously, there are a million different scenarios where sequencing can impact your gameplay, and whether or not you choose to use one ability, play one card, or make one attack before another has implications that create a totally different game state. The scenarios I'll take you through are somewhat basic, but the idea is to showcase how to think about sequencing, rather than saying that doing one thing over another is correct in every conceivable game. That is, how will the action I take impact my next play or the next? So bearing all that in mind, let's jump into an example. Let's say I've got my favorite Gurren Lagann deck here. I've just refreshed my deck, I'm level 2, and I know that with my early plays, Combine Gurren Lagann, which comes out early if I have Gurren and Lagann on the stage together, and Yoko, who comes out early if I have 2 or less climaxes in my waiting room, I can set up a nice and beefy stage, draw some cards, heal, and overall have a productive turn. So I know a few things here. 1, there's a Combined Gurren Lagann in my stock, and I need some cards in my hand to make this work. So I use my Salvaging Brainstormer here, both to pay off the Combined Gurren Lagann so it's in my waiting room and ready to use, and so I can salvage some cards for gas. Lucky me, I hit 3 climaxes and I salvaged 3 characters. But oh no, what have I done? I now have 3 climaxes in my waiting room and I can't play Yoko. And if I can't play Yoko, not only do I lose out on a heal, I now have a dead card in my hand until I refresh again or hit level 3. I didn't take into account how brainstorming could potentially change the game state in a way that impacted other things I wanted to do. like namely play the Yoko. In this scenario, what I should have done is played Yoko first and then brainstormed. Then I'll proceed with the rest of my turn, playing out the Gurrens, combining with the Loggins, and attacking. But wait, maybe I can do it better. My brainstormer, Simon, like we said, is a salvaging brainstormer. So naturally, the more cards I have in my waiting room, the more choices I have if I succeed in brainstorming, and the better he is. Given that, wouldn't it make more sense if I played my Yoko, paid for my Gurrens and Loggins, drew and discarded cards with their on-play effects, and then brainstormed? When I move more cards from my stock and my hand to the waiting room, I can get more mileage out of my salvage brainstormer by giving myself more choices. If this gives me the option of, let's say, grabbing one of my finishers versus not having it available to me if I made these plays in a different order, that gives me a huge benefit, not only this turn by getting the most out of my abilities, but also next turn when I'm more prepared. So by using proper sequencing when I play characters to the stage and use my abilities, I get more out of them, and ultimately that helps me win the game. But it's not just playing cards. Let's talk about how sequencing is important when we make our attacks. Moving to another deck, let's talk about the newest set on the block, Kaguya Love is War. Take this stage for example. I'm at level 1 and I've got my level 1 reverse combo online, which combos with a standby climax. So I've stood by a level 2 to my back row beside my level assister and I'm ready to make some attacks. In my center stage, I can choose to attack with my level 0k, which is a clean cut and a runner, my level 1 combo, which lets me search for a character when I reverse an opponent, or my 1-1 with Hand Encore. Now, I can win each of these lanes at the moment, and my opponent is still at level 0, so I decide to swing with my 1-1 first. My opponent takes 2 damage and levels up to 1. Then I move to attack with my level 1 combo, which at 5500 is facing a 4500 level 0. I trigger a standby climax. Well, I do have another level 2 target in my waiting room to stand by, but the best place I can put it is on top of my 1-1, which is already pretty big and I paid stock for it. If I place it over my weaker level 0 or level 1, I lose an attacker, and if I place it over my existing level 2 or level assister, I may as well not have used the ability at all. Well, so it's not the best, but oh well. But then my opponent plays a backup. He's level 1 now, and he backs up his level 0 character to make it 6500. So I don't get my reverse combo, and I lose a character. As a result, this turn is actually pretty crappy for me, as I've lost a lot of potential value and my opponent gets to keep some of his characters that'll be useful on his turn. Losing a character also means the level 2 I just stood by is 1k smaller as it gains power from each other character I have, so it's more vulnerable during my opponent's turn. So in this turn, what I didn't keep in mind is how the state of the game can change when I make attacks. Triggering climaxes, especially standby, has the power to change the stage significantly, and my opponent leveling up through me doing damage to him changes what cards he can play. In this situation, instead of attacking with my 1-1 first, it would have made a lot more sense to attack with my level 1 combo first. Not only does attacking with that first guarantee a reverse as my opponent is still level 0 and can't back up against it, but also once I'm done attacking with her and she gets the ability off, she becomes a much better option for me to stand by a potential target should I trigger a standby climax. Now given the same scenario, just by attacking in a different order, I'm able to add a card from my deck to my hand, and my center stage is a lot stronger. Thus, by sequencing my attacks in a way that considers how the game state can change just by making attacks, I've put myself in a much better position using the same cards and same abilities. The moral of the story is that order matters because the state of the game changes from play to play. Let's do one more example. Now, sequencing doesn't always translate straight into cause and effect relationships, like I brainstormed too many climaxes into my waiting room and now I can't play my early play, or I healed away the color in my clock that I was relying on for later plays, or I played this character that gets a bunch of power when it comes in for how many other characters you have, but I played it on an empty stage before I played a bunch of other stuff. Sometimes, unlike those A to B causal relationships, we sequence things to give ourselves the best probability of a favorable outcome. Let's talk about this card, Zekken Yuki. She's one of the most well-known level 1 combos in all of Weiss Schwarz. All other abilities aside, when she attacks with her combo, you can pay 1 and discard a card to search for up to 2 characters from your deck, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your deck. Now this has the desirable effect of both thinning your deck and giving you better compression, which we talked about before in this video series, and allowing you to pay out climaxes that end up in your stock through your attack triggers, besides of course that she searches up 2 damn characters. So let's say you've got one of these things on the stage and you've got the combo up. Regardless of all other factors, what about the way this card's abilities work gives us the best idea of how to sequence our attacks? Well, first, during the trigger step, you have the potential to trigger a climax. You don't want climaxes in your stock, and you especially don't want to let them get buried too deep before you can pay them out for your next refresh. Zekken Yuki, when sequenced properly, lets us mitigate some of that risk during the attack phase. If you choose to attack with her first and then make 2 attacks with characters that aren't Zekken Yuki, on 2 out of 3 attack triggers, if you trigger a climax, you have no immediate way to pay it out. However, if you wait to attack with her until A, you trigger a climax, or B, she's your final attacker, you give yourself the opportunity to improve your refresh compression. Moreover, Zeka Yuki's effect takes 2 non-climax cards out of your deck. If you attack with her first and then attack with 2 other characters that aren't Zeka Yuki, your chances of triggering a climax during the attack phase increases. If you attack with her last, however, the chances are the lowest that you'll get a climax stuck in your stock that you can't pay out. So just by merit of what these abilities do, and if you think about how they change the game state, namely where some cards will move from your hand to the waiting room, from your stock to the waiting room, from your deck to your hand, and from your deck to your stock, you can get an idea of how best, or in this case, when best, to use them. Now, in the game of Weiss Schwarz, there are countless scenarios you can find yourself in and untold numbers of card abilities that interact in ways that change where other cards are, and thus create new and different scenarios to think through. To become really good at sequencing, you have to take into account many different effects at once, and sometimes iterate out 2, 3, or several plays ahead to see how you can make the most favorable plays given the variance you may encounter. But of course, that comes with months and even years of practice, and more importantly, a basic understanding of how to think about sequencing, which is what I hope I've helped you players at home come to possess. It really is amazing how just playing one card before another, or using 2 abilities in a different order, lets you get so much more out of the same card. It's a big part of why when a pro player picks up a deck, they can get so much more out of their cards than an inexperienced player, even though they're playing the same deck with the same cards and abilities. Solid fundamentals, like having good sequencing, can help you make the most out of any deck, and make awesome things possible like Junken Pon taking 3rd place in the online Springfest with Mono Blue Batman Ninja, or 2 Disgaea trial decks mashed together winning Japanese Worlds that one year. So now, with all that in mind, might I suggest some good sequencing right now to all of you players watching? Go play some games, practice making better plays with this information in mind, and watch your mental state change into one that's more geared to becoming better at the game. But no matter what you decide to do before what, always try to sequence your plays to give yourself the best chance of having fun and enjoying Weiss Schwarz. And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.